Hello and welcome to the EconBuff podcast. I'm your host, Lee Stitzel. With me today is Dr. Ryan Mattson. Ryan is a research associate at the Center for Financial Stability and professor of economics at West Texas A&M. Ryan, welcome back.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
So today our topic is a very exciting topic. It's cryptocurrency. This is what everybody's been waiting for you to talk about. Everybody's been waiting for this episode. I have people email the podcast and say, you know what you really need to do is cryptocurrency. I have students in my class that say, I love your channel. When are you going to talk about Ethereum? And I said, what's Ethereum? So, so here we are. So Ryan, just start us off nice and simple. What's cryptocurrency?
Sure. So cryptocurrency is a kind of digital money that imitates cash transaction online. So the idea is that you get a secure and credible transaction that is at least has some level of protection in terms of anonymity. And this is done through this really amazing piece of technology called the blockchain. And the blockchain, I really want to stress how central this is because you can do more than just currency and money with this. You can do legal contracts, you can do potential financial issues. I think DeFi would be another great episode at some point, but let's focus on Bitcoin. The blockchain is basically a decentralized history of transactions. And what this does is it allows for making it difficult for people to counterfeit the money that's involved in that transaction, and it verifies that the transaction did indeed take place. So if you were going to sell me that nice chessboard in the background there, we would need to verify that this transaction took place and you received M amount of money from me and I received X amount of goods from you. And this verification system is really actually quite astounding in what it does, because it it sends this out to a bunch of other computers that verify all at the same time in a decentralized network. Yes, this transaction took place. Ryan gave M amounts of money to Lee for X amounts of goods. And this is a really important piece of plumbing, because this kind of transaction, if I were to write you a check for, say, the chessboard again, what that would do is that would go from my bank. Let's say I'm working with Amarillo National Bank and you're working with Happy State Bank. But that check would have to be verified at the Dallas Federal Reserve and through the Federal Reserve system. So that'd be a centralized ledger. And would, of course, they have an electronic system for it. It's very, very fast now as well. But instead of, a lot of different computers verifying this at the same time, you would have one centralized location verifying it. And this decentralization of this ledger, this history, really is fantastic, because it can help keep counterfeit from happening. So I can't say, well, I paid Lee M, but then go back and maybe take out a certain amount of M during the transaction or copy a certain amount of it, which whether you're printing paper or sending out electronic signals and messages, counterfeit happens. So this slows that counterfeit. But the money supply, in the case of Bitcoin, then, is much like any other money, tied to a number of transactions made, the speed of those transactions, and the number of users. And Bitcoin, especially with the original paper by the I'm not sure how to say it, the fancy word for fake names, pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. Was this beautiful bit of computer science, I'm sure, but as we'll talk about later on in the podcast, did no favors for the economics of it. The money supply is in a certain way flawed in Bitcoin that I'm sure we'll get into, but that's kind of the basics of it that we have. We have this transaction verification going on online. You and I don't need to know each other, but there is now a ledger that has been verified and verified by numerous sources using this algorithm. And it really is quite fantastic.
So if somebody says to me, what's cryptocurrency? A suitable answer is it is a record of transaction history, or a history of transactions.
Yes.
That's very there's something elegant about that.
Yeah. Well, money is this very interesting thing. A lot of people think of money in terms of a good, a piece of gold, a piece of paper, a checking account. Money is not a good. Money is not a commodity. Money is service, and specifically for types of service, as I stress in my class, it has to be a medium of exchange, a store of value, a unit of account, and a speculative instrument. So you can exchange goods for it. You can hold on to it. It's durable. It keeps that store of value. In your mind, you understand how much it's worth. And also you can gamble with it. And these are four very important aspects of any money, whether it's gold, whether it's fish hooks, whether it's, there are Polynesian tribes that are said to have these giant stones where you own a certain
Stones
amount
of Yap, right?
Yeah. And I think, if we're going to go with poetry on it, I think former Minneapolis Fed president Kocho Lakota, one of his famous papers is entitled "Money is Memory." So what money provides is this record of that transaction of value between people. It really is. I'm a monetary theorist, so you can see, well, I'm a monetary economist. I'm not a very good theorist. I'm a monetary economist. And so, it really digs down into this issue of how we are exchanging things, because money takes us out of the world of barter. And the world of barter is an awful, horrible place. You don't ever want to do barter, unless you're having fun with it. But generally, for an economy as large as ours, we need a stable medium of exchange, store of value, unit of accounts, and speculative tool.
So when you say you don't want to be in barter, that's at the economy level. So just clarify that. I don't think either you or I mean, there's anything wrong with bartering with your neighbor, but
No.
but you don't want an economy based on that, right?
No.
So I love the definition that we're working with. That's great, and it's probably good to drill down into some of the details there. One of the questions I was going to ask is just the classic question: is cryptocurrency money? You've already kind of taken that on head on. Do you have anything to add? Just evaluate the arguments that people would put forth on either side, saying it is or isn't. It isn't money. And do you want to distinguish between currency and money at all?
I don't want to distinguish between currency and money. Currency to me is highly liquid, low to no interest, but it's not the only form of money. Your checking account could have a certain interest rate associated with it. It's also very liquid, but maybe not as liquid as cash. Your savings account is not, well, it's liquider these days. Slightly higher rate of interest, but money market mutual funds, overnight repurchase agreements, commercial paper, all of these things could be counted as money, as the Center for Financial Stability does with its Divisia monetary aggregates. So you can, big M money can be many different things, so long as they function as this medium of exchange, store of value, speculative tool, unit of account definition. Is cryptocurrency money? Absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt. The question is it a good money?
Right.
And that's really kind of drilling down to, I think, getting to the heart of the matter here of, what do you want your money to do? If you want your money to be a stable medium of exchange and store of value, then you want something like the dollar, which is very well regulated by the Federal Reserve. They have an inflation target to get that price stability. And that maintains it as this medium of exchange, because you know what a dollar is worth. I know what a dollar is worth. We both agree on that. If the day ever comes where you and I disagree on the value of a $100 bill, then the US economy is in trouble. But also we can stick that $100 bill somewhere and just wait it out, and it will maintain a certain amount of value. Of course, inflation will eat a certain amount, but we know how much that inflation rate is going to be. The Fed's targeting 2%. So, over a certain amount of time, it decreases in value. A cryptocurrency, so long as it's stable and serves as a medium of exchange, yes, as a money, but it also is a money in its speculative form, which I think is where Bitcoin, I think, inadvertently shines. I think Bitcoin is one of the biggest victims of the law of unintended consequences this century. What what Satoshi Nakamoto created was very much in line with approximating, not quite getting there, but a Friedman money growth rule. And this is an idea from Milton Friedman that money should grow at a constant rate. What Nakamoto did is had money grow to a constant level, 21 million, that's as many Bitcoin as there will ever be in the world, at least according to the algorithm. And it will slowly get there and kind of slow down in that money creation. So it's not really a constant money growth rule, it's changing. And this approximates kind of the idea of mining for gold in a way, but not really, because gold, for example, we think there's a set amount. Maybe in ancient Greece they thought there's only this much amount of gold in the world, and then they discover, well, we've now got a trade route into India or China, where there are more gold mines, and now we have this amount. And then people figure out, well, we don't need the actual gold, we just need the pieces of paper. And you have money upon money upon money, and more of this divorce from a commodity and into a pure service. So
you brought up the idea of mining. Tell us what mining is and how that's working, and why is it that there can only be 21 million Bitcoins in the world?
Well, so that's the limit set by the mathematical algorithm, that there is a limit of 21 million. And the miners, and this is another piece of brilliance here. The miners actually are the verifiers. When you are mining for Bitcoin, what you're actually doing is you're taking these blocks of transactions that have been made. So you and I make a trade, and that goes out to the miners who verify the transaction, and their payment for these verifications is they are entered into kind of almost this bit of a lottery. You could get some Bitcoin if you finish this block. You might not get some Bitcoin if you finish this block, but that's their incentive, that they can get Bitcoin as they verify these transactions. And that was very, I think, creative on Nakamoto's part to incentivize verification outside of just saying, okay, we're going to have this verification system and pay these people fees as they verify things. Much in the same way, we pay the Federal Reserve for its services to verify these transactions that go on in our banking system.
I don't think people think about, verification of transaction histories as like a central thing that underlies money. So, I think you're bringing a new idea here. So I like that quite a lot. And so I think when people think mining, right, they're thinking about like finding Bitcoin, but you're actually talking about something a little bit different. And so what happens is, and again, I don't understand what a blockchain is. Probably not very many people really do. But so when you say multiple people are verifying these transaction history, is that what's going on with the mining? Is you could almost, again, yes, I'm speaking a little bit out of ignorance here, but you're multiple people verify the same transaction?
Yes. You're decentralizing. It goes out. Instead of there's like one place and the Dallas Fed and Washington D.C. for the Federal Reserve Board. Instead, it goes out to whoever has a computer that's dedicated to verifying and encrypting and decrypting these transactions. So that the mining aspect, and I get to use air quotes on the video now. The mining aspect of this, right. You kind of do find it. You kind of do mine it because you're providing this service and you're paid for that service. And the way you're paid is through monetary creation. The Bitcoin that the miners are paid is Bitcoin that is not yet, or has not yet been in circulation.
Right.
And as they go through these eras, when Bitcoin reaches certain blocks, every 210,000 blocks, remember these blocks are a ledger of transactions that they have, it's encrypted, miners decrypt it, verify, encrypt it back up, it's in the ledger. As we get to these different eras, then the reward for these miners is going to cut in half. So if they get 50 Bitcoin in era 1 for this, verification service, by era 2 it's 25, and then by era 3 it's further down. We're now in the middle of, I believe, era 4. I checked this morning. I want to say they're verifying block 680,000. And the next, I think the next one is, let's see here. Well, I guess era 5 would be 210 times 5, which I can't quite, but we're not quite halfway there.
Sure.
It should be sometime in 2023, 2024 when the next halving happens, unless a lot more people use Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing about that's interesting. Because you and I will measure time by our days and our minutes and our hours. One of the fascinating aspects of Bitcoin is actually we could reach those eras later or sooner, depending on how many more transactions are made.
Right.
Bitcoin could speed up quite a bit if we get, I don't know, a better computing power. It was quantum computing is the general idea. Better computing power or a lot more people using it at the same time. And that is going to, that may speed up the times at which these eras are hit. And then, of course, the times at which the payment for these miners may go down. But I think that, one thing to watch is if Bitcoin ever gets into a period of high frequency trading, because the time is very different from, you and I pay you $100 and that happened on April 23rd and you exchanged at this. This is, this verification happened within this block at this particular time here, but you could get more and more blocks at faster and faster rates, or slower, I guess. Also.
Yeah, so I think several things come to mind there, actually. So one thing is that you're doing a half-life sort of thing. So you ever getting to the actual 21 million Bitcoin, or
yes,
you think that that'll actually be, so the idea of the half-life payment out of the new coin, should make you reach that limit. You slow down as you get to the limit, right?
There's a distinct, and this is where it's actually not a Friedman money growth rule. Friedman money growth will be, you say, it grows at 2%, it will always grow at 2%, and we just let it grow at that. Right. At this point, it will grow at 2% or 1% or 0.5% or 0.005%, 0.0005%. But at some point, you reach 21 million.
Yeah.
At which point then, well, what do the miners do?
That's what I was going to ask next.
And that's always, that's the question that comes up in class. Well, what do the miners do? Well, at that point, what will need to happen is the miners have to transfer over to being verifiers, to being paid certain fees in order to verify these transactions. Now, I want to say that that's not going to happen until 2040 or 2044. You can look that up when, but it's not supposed to happen for another 10, 20 years, maybe.
But again, that's based on the transaction rate we're observing now.
Right, but it could happen. And this is all based on not blockchain itself. There's no reason at all that we should have a mining growth rule. There's no reason at all we should have a 21 million limit just because it's arbitrary. It's just trying to approximate the way that, say, a commodity like gold would be used, mined, taken out, refined, and then used as money. We've long since abandoned that as money, which makes Bitcoin interesting because it's both extremely new and extremely primitive.
Yeah.
And that's, I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying Bitcoin's primitive, but the money growth rule is actually, yes, very primitive compared to the kinds of growth rules that you could have. That we have with the dollar, for example. You can approximate dollar growth based on a Taylor rule, what the Federal Reserve is doing in targeting interest rates. You could do.
Now, wait a minute. You told us in a previous episode the Taylor rule works until it doesn't. So
yes, well, all rules work until they don't. And
even the money growth rule.
Same is true for money growth, which is interesting also because that means that Bitcoin has no discretion. There is no central bank of Bitcoin. In fact, there's well, okay, I guess there are Bitcoin banks kind of now, or bank-like systems, but we can get into that in a second. There's no central bank of Bitcoin that meets and says, well, the Bitcoin economy is in a recession, we need to pump money in, or Bitcoin economy is too hot, we need to take money out.
Right.
This is a completely rules-based approach. Uh-huh. We have done approximately what Friedman had suggested of basically having a computer program as the central bank. And that's what's fascinating about this Bitcoin growth rule. Now, Ethereum, Ripple, my personal favorite Dogecoin. They all have
That's everyone's favorite.
Various different money growth rules that you can apply to it. There's nothing that says you can't have a different money growth rule. This is just the one that was chosen for Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fascinating, because one of my next question is, which you've talked about, what's Bitcoin, made by a specific person and run a specific way. What's going on that there are so many cryptocurrencies, right? You've mentioned several there. I'm sure if we go and look, we can find. I have no idea how many there are. Do you have a sense of how many there are? Are we talking about 20 or 100 or 1,000?
Dozens and hundreds, right? I mean, here's the thing. What we've done, monetary service has been a monopoly for as long as we've had a Federal Reserve, right? Yep. You can go back to certain eras in the United States. There was something called the free banking era, where there was kind of more competition of various monies. You can go to pre-Civil War days, where it seemed like each state had their own type of currency. But the issue is money seems to have this natural monopoly aspect to it.
Well, so let's talk about that. Are there economies of scale there?
Yeah, there's certain economies of scale with that. And there are transaction costs. It's a lot easier for me to think in terms of one money rather than several. I have trouble. I am an economics professor, and I have trouble with exchange rates. But if you talk to students or professors who come from, let's say, Mexico or Brazil or Argentina or Africa or East Asia, where they've had to think in terms of 2 or 3 or 4 different currencies, it's almost second nature to them. You can learn it, but it's just easier if it's one and it's accepted. Because then if I come in and say, hey, Lee, I'd really like to buy that chess set for 200 pesos.
I'm getting hosed.
Might, at first, if you don't know pay, you're like, hey, 200.
200, that sounds like a lot.
200. Yeah, all right.
Getting hosed. I have a granola bar.
Or if I say 500 yen, I mean, we don't know.
Wait, say that again.
Think it. 500 yen?
500 yen. Yeah. See, yen, I don't have any idea. Euros, I can kind of do.
Yeah.
The question is, how many Bitcoin is it worth?
Some small decimal at this point.
Yeah, it's weird, right? So there's which I forget. There's some application that I use, and the advertisements are for Coinbase. Which we could talk about Coinbase. Actually, it's an interesting company, but
it went public this past week. Yeah.
Oh, is that right? I missed that. I had caught they had some controversy several months ago, but their advertisement says sign up for Coinbase and you'll get $5 of Bitcoin, and it just I couldn't explain to you how hilarious it was that they used the unit of account that is the US dollar to explain how much Bitcoin you're getting, right?
Well, so
why didn't they write 0.000005 Bitcoin or whatever that number would be?
Because 0.00005 Bitcoin may be worth, I don't know, let's say $20 today.
Yeah.
But in 2 weeks, it could be worth 2,000.
Right.
It's extremely volatile, and this is where Bitcoin fails on the unit of account. Now, great store of value and great speculation, right? If I wanted to, so actually, full disclosure here, I've been watching Bitcoin now since 2012. Have never been tempted to buy it. I've been sitting on the fence with this for 8 years, just as an academic exercise, loving the whole concept and the theory behind it. Finally, this morning broke down and bought some Bitcoin, mainly because I'm thinking, well, I think the price is going to go up. I'm not going to spend that Bitcoin because let's say I bought, I don't know, $15 worth of Bitcoin this morning. And let's say tonight, it's pizza night. I'll hang out with my kids and we'll order a pizza. But let's say I order a pizza with my 15 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then next week, it turns out that 15 Bitcoin I spent on a pizza is now worth $150 or some, much larger amount. People will grab it and they'll want to hoard it.
Yes.
And that makes it a very, very poor medium of exchange, because right now everyone is speculating on it. Everyone is using it as a store of value. And while that is a part of the monetary service, it's failing in a unit of account because it's I can't think in Bitcoin anyway. The price fluctuates so much.
There's something weird
And it's
about
failing as a
Bitcoin.
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, it's failing as minimum exchange and unit of account. Yeah.
So I want to talk about both of those things. The first thing is, as unit of account, it's very weird to me that it's like there's a fundamental flaw in the design that it is expressed in so many decimal points. That's just like counter to the human.
Well, yes and no.
I'm just saying we like round numbers.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
my
I mean, and as a macroeconomist, levels don't matter. It's the growth rate.
right. Yeah.
We may it may be that Bitcoin, once we reach 21 million, it finally settles in, I don't know, 7 to 8 decimal places over. People get used to that. People get used to these changes in the levels. What we're feeling viscerally with this is the growth rate. In the same way that, if you're experiencing a large bout of inflation, you feel the price changes viscerally. It's not that milk is, $4 a gallon. It's that milk was $2 a gallon the week before. It's that change and it's that increase that may or may not be keeping up with your wages. So this is going to be, for Bitcoin, kind of the opposite direction here. If we're feeling this growth rate in this value, in this speculation, the level of it, like I can think about how much I bought in Bitcoin this morning in dollars. I honestly, I don't know what it was because I saw like the third or fourth decimal and stopped there. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. It's all in dollars. And this is also part of the way it was designed. I kind of want to circle back to my statement that this is the worst victim of the law of unintended consequences this century. Nakamoto designed this to be a pure medium of exchange. And I know that because when you read the paper, he doesn't create a banking system. In fact, it's something that was not supposed to be there. Now, the idea then is that you don't speculate on it, that it maintains its value. And actually the opposite happened to it. It's failing from its initial purpose. On the other hand, it's succeeding greatly in being a great gambling tool. That speculation going on right now and has been going on for the past, where are we now, 12 years of Bitcoin? It's 2009, 2010, 11, 12 years of Bitcoin, has been actually the major aspect of it. Whereas the initial desire of creation was a stable medium of exchange. That's what the money growth rule was supposed to give. And instead, it's giving this very speculative tool. So oddly enough, when you loosen up that money supply, if you go with just a Friedman growth rate or even a variable growth rate, you could stabilize the price much better, and it'd be a great medium of exchange, but it'd be a really boring speculative asset.
I don't see much speculation in currency, right?
Yeah. And we've gone back and forth on some things before. What's the Hayek quote about the role of economics is to demonstrate.
The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they know about what they imagine they can design. Yeah, money goes perfectly in there. That's very apt. So let's circle to the medium of exchange thing then, because of this is a good transition point. So I have my Bitcoin, and I'm a crazy person, and I'm like, you know what? I'm buying pizza tonight with Bitcoin. Can I even do that? Like, how many places? What am I paying for in Bitcoin? Like, I get that if you get in certain places on the internet, a good example would be like people that have like podcasts or something, and then you have a Patreon or something, right? And then a subscriber only page and extra podcast content or something like that. Those people can ask for Bitcoin, and that that works great. But I can't go to Best Buy and be like, I need to replace my microphone, let me drop some Bitcoin here. So what are we talking about scale wise, as for just if I wanted to use it as a medium of exchange?
You could. And I've, and you and I were both located in the Texas Panhandle. We like cash over here. So I think that in terms of Amarillo, for example, you won't find many places that would accept Bitcoin. Maybe you would. Like, for example, I am 90% certain I can't pay for my Pizza Hut pizza with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But I think in larger metropolitan areas, San Francisco, London, New York City, yes. I mean, back when it was, at like $100 to a Bitcoin,
Yeah.
it seemed to me I heard more about people using it to purchase things as a medium of exchange. These days, I don't know. I would certainly love to be paid in Bitcoin. I don't want to spend in Bitcoin.
Yeah. So the menu cost idea just jumped into my mind, because so if a Bitcoin is $100, then I go over to Pizza Hut and it says, a fifth of a Bitcoin, 0.2 per pizza, per extra large pizza or whatever. If I come back the next Friday and now Bitcoin is $200, how are they adjusting? Seems like the menu cost must be very high.
I think we're used to thinking about this in terms of a hyperinflation. I think we're used to thinking about the menu cost idea in terms of, pre-World War II Germany, where barrels of Deutschmarks couldn't pay for groceries, or we can talk about Zimbabwe or Venezuela, the other more recent hyperinflations, where people are having to like change the prices as the day goes on. It'd be the same problem, but in reverse. It's a hyperdeflation.
Right.
You have to constantly be aware of what these price changes are, and that's what makes it very difficult as a medium of exchange. That increases those transaction costs. So that is where, in terms of behaving as a money, behaving as a currency, it's just not working out very well.
So I would really love to know what Pizza Hut in Canyon, Texas is going to do with Bitcoin if I were able to pay. Like you said, if I go to San Francisco and I have some Bitcoin and I go and hit up hopefully I'd go to a different restaurant in San Francisco, but suppose I go to Pizza Hut. I'm really curious what they're doing. Like, it just seems like the business model is so predicated on the dollar that they have, it's revenues, and we put these in different places and deal with our costs. And then it's like, now you have this extra thing of like Bitcoin. Now businesses are engaged in speculation. What's going on there? I don't know that, because I don't know if that is a question that's even knowable.
They possibly could. I would be more worried about what managers and cashiers do. Because if I was a manager or a cashier, what I would do is say, okay, this customer A has paid in Bitcoin. And I would take here's $15 pizza. Here's the $15 for it. And then I'd take the Bitcoin.
Right.
That's something as a company, I might be, they may want to look into something like that. I know that can't be easy, but of course people find a way.
Yes.
In terms of, when the company gets Bitcoin, companies issue commercial paper, companies hold certain assets in savings. I wouldn't be surprised if they have some kind of repository. We got X amount of Bitcoin. Let's stick it over here. Elon Musk made a big splash by saying that Tesla is going to accept payment in Bitcoin.
So why not accept payment in silver or gold?
Well,
can't I run over with a minted coin and be like, the price of silver somewhere in the ballpark of 30 bucks an ounce. Like, I want 2 extra large pizzas. So
Bitcoin is
Ryan and I can have lunch after this episode. Like, here's a silver coin. They're probably not taking that. So,
well, Bitcoin's going to be easier to trade than a silver coin. You have to find a silver trader, and as a car dealership, you may not know, but as a car dealership, you have a computer and, hey, we've got this Bitcoin traded, and that's a very low transaction cost to then converting it to the dollar as quickly as you want. Along the southern border between the US and Mexico, you'll find a lot of stores on both sides will accept both pesos and dollars.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy for them to exchange that currency if they need to, or make change in that currency, or do that. So I really want to stress, Bitcoin has lowered these transaction costs of exchange rates. And that makes, I think I alluded earlier to this issue of, the history of free banking I think I said free money, but it's free banking. Different banks with different currencies competing with each other. That was very expensive in the 1890s because they'd have to hold certain amounts of gold to back up their or silver to back up the script that they were issuing. We went to the greenback and the dollar and central banking and the Federal Reserve because it was much cheaper for one large company to provide that script.
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale.
Yes.
And Bitcoin, I mean, think about the phone systems. When I was young, I'm old enough to where I can still remember these. There were rotary phones with landlines that went in. You had to kind of like to leave the room, and your parents wouldn't hear you talk on the phone. You had to kind of leave the room with this wire attached to it.
Yes.
And there was one phone company.
Yes.
And now there's this thing which is beat up and cheap, remarkably cheap actually, compared to what cell phone service used to be.
Yes. And it's different than mine.
Yes.
Which is the important part.
Yeah.
Because
we can still communicate.
Yes.
I can still call you on that phone. And so this monetary service, which has this high fixed cost to entry. I mean, if I wanted to start Ryan Bucks 20 years ago, I'd have to get, a printer. I'd have to work with making sure that counterfeiters didn't get there. I'd have to establish my credibility. If you have a crypto that can demonstrate through a blockchain that it is credible, that it is secure, Bitcoin advertises anonymity, which, okay, fine. But I think, I don't know, in the time of social media, I'm not so sure people are so concerned about anonymity anymore.
It's weird, right? Somehow I want my currency to be anonymous, but I'll put what I had for dinner on my Facebook tonight. Like, and that's there is something weird about the entire online experience. And this isn't really maybe the time or place for this conversation, but it's weird to me how Bitcoin, like cryptocurrencies, it fits in there. I mean, you even talked about like Dogecoin, right? So for those that aren't familiar, there's a very famous meme. That's the Doge meme, and it has many variants by now. And now it has a cryptocurrency named after it. And what the backstory is there, I don't know. My guess is it's somebody on the internet that had the capability of making cryptocurrency and thought the Doge meme is funny, and so they made that. But you see this weirdness.
Competition.
Do what?
The beauty of competition.
And I do want to make that point very strongly. But let me finish this thought really quickly. Is we see this weirdness of people doing things online that you and I, we would never even think of doing this. So my brother sends me this Instagram post, and I think it's probably staged, right? But there's a young lady and she's with her boyfriend. She said, oh, he surprised me with these flowers for my date. And then they like broke up later that night, and she's filming herself crying, and I'm like, this one's probably staged. But like, we observe that kind of thing. Like, why are you putting on Facebook? Why is that the catharsis that you want, and not call your friend on the phone and talk to her, or go over to your parents' house and like actually have real human connection, which ironic, you and I are recording this over Zoom, like, but I'd rather be in person talking to you. Sure. But this offers a certain benefit. So, call me a hypocrite. That's fair.
Well, here's the thing. And I see where you're going with this. And so I love this idea, and I want to drag it back to currency.
Do it.
Imagine how people felt when paper money was first introduced.
Okay, I was coming to that. So
okay,
very good, very good.
Yeah, you've been, imagine you've been dealing with these gold or silver or copper coins, and hey, they're tangible, and you know what, they will survive trips across the desert.
Exactly.
And some guy is handing you a paper, a piece of paper, saying, "Well, this paper is worth 2 of those gold coins."
Yeah. The hell it is, right?
Yeah. And which is something that you and I, if it's the right kind of paper, immediately like, oh, well, thank you.
No problem.
We don't think about it. In fact, we prefer the paper to the coins these days, right? And now we have these little plastic cards, which, I remember my grandparents kind of sniffing at, and I still, these credit, card. No. We don't want to do these cards. Especially because for some reason credit cards were too close to debit cards, so they didn't want debit cards.
Okay.
And you even have people arguing, budgeting gurus talking about, oh, you all need to be doing your budgeting in cash with envelopes, right?
Yeah.
which maybe, you know, for my generation works,
Yeah.
but for some of my students in their generation, they've grown up with this.
Well, so
This
let
is
me
in their
let me
head.
interject that, because I've said this on the pod before.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with exactly this envelope system type thing. And the idea is like, oh, there's like a physicality of the paper and it's like
Mhm,
painful to
mhm.
hand it over or something. My mind has that like exactly backwards. So like you're talking about your students, you're actually talking about me. Like if it's money, it's meant to be spent. And if it's the
Yep.
card, then I'm like thinking about, okay, what's in my
Yep.
account?
Yeah.
Am I going
Yeah.
to be able to afford this pizza? Right. Um,
Exactly.
so but what's interesting is, and I want to get to this. I think you're going there. So I apologize if I'm cutting you
Mhm.
off a little bit. But um so suppose you did come up and said, hey, I want this chessboard, right? And you gave me silver coins. Like if you gave me silver coins of an appropriate value, I'd take it. And if you
Yep.
said, um, I want this chessboard and you gave me $100 bills in the right amount, I'd take it. And if you came up and said, here's a Bitcoin, I'd probably take it. I'm pretty indifferent.
Mhm.
And in fact, they're not, they would all work for medium of exchange in that sense.
Mhm.
Um, but I would value them for different reasons almost, right? So it's
Yep.
like if you got the silver, I mean, that has properties that we might like. If say I think inflation's coming or something, maybe I want to be in something that isn't the dollar. If I'd take the Bitcoin because I'd have fun speculating that, just
Mhm.
like you did whenever you bought did you buy Bitcoin or did you buy one of the
I
others?
bought Bitcoin.
Okay, so you bought the classic.
Yeah.
And then
I went classic.
but if you gave me $100 bills, I'd take it, probably end up in the bank,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then that would be just as
Mhm.
like you described, just as something that would
Yeah.
transfer. So, what's your reaction to that?
So money, like I said, since it's a service, what you have is some substitutability between different kinds
Yeah.
of money. My debit card is linked to my checking account. So I'm writing a check, but not writing a check anymore, right?
Yes.
If I'm holding on to cash, it's very different from than holding on to that piece of plastic card. And then on top of that, you can go even further and say, well, there's a savings account, a money market mutual fund, um, and go further and further kind of up, because when the Fed releases a certain amount of money into the system, banks take that and they generate more monetary service with it. When you deposit, say, those $100 bills that I gave you for the chessboard, when you deposit that in the bank takes that and it loans it out. And it gets a certain return of interest in terms of the dollar based on its lending. And you've generated from your deposit much more than $100 worth of monetary service. Bitcoin was designed, and it doesn't have to be like this, but this is how it was designed. Bitcoin was designed to not have that fractional reserve
Right.
banking system. Bitcoin was designed so that money growth from financed by debt would not be available. Of course, people found a way around that with the exchange rates and the foreign exchange rate, but the exchange rate trading and things like that. But I still have yet to see a bank form that pays off an interest in Bitcoin that
Right.
is not linked to Bitcoin dollar gains or Bitcoin euro gains. I could be wrong on that, and I'd love to hear about that in the comments if people have those for YouTube. But that is a severe problem, because one of the reasons we moved on from the silver and the gold was there just was not enough silver and gold to do it. So we brought these pieces of paper. And at some point, it got easier to just have these little pieces of plastic connected to little ones and zeros. And Bitcoin is just an example of that next step of, where this service of transfer of wealth is going, where this monetary service is going. And I think that that's incredible to watch.
So there's
Um,
some different camps there that get at exactly what you're talking about. So
mhm,
I think there's a camp of people that are like gold and silver, it has intrinsic value. Dollars don't have that. Bitcoin doesn't have that. And then I think there are people that are like something physical fundamentally, that's what I want. I want the gold or the silver. The
mhm,
paper dollars have it, but this 1 0 in the bank thing doesn't really make me very happy, and Bitcoin's not real,
mhm.
right? And then there are people that are like, what I don't like is this expanding monetary base, so like give me gold or silver or give me Bitcoin. I don't like the US dollar. So it is like different people have different criticisms. How would you evaluate sort of those different camps, if you will?
So I mean, for the gold standard, usually you have in economics, we separate out between commodity money and fiat money, right? Fiat money, that's to say that fiat money has value because people say it has value,
right?
Whether it's a central bank, a government, or the money holders who use it. I like to tell my class the story of Peter Pan. You ever been to the play Peter Pan?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so middle of it's great. Take your kids. Middle of the play, Tinkerbell is hurt by Captain Hook, right? And then you've got to clap in the audience to keep Tinkerbell alive, and you got to clap, you got to believe, and the actor or actress is like, oh, you have to believe, and so I'm there with my daughter, and we're clapping, and the audience isn't really clapping along, and then Tinkerbell dies. No, I'm kidding. Okay,
I was gonna ask. It never works out that way.
Tinkerbell comes back to life. This is very much how fiat money works. It only survives because you believe it does. We give it that value. So a commodity money, what they would argue then is that gold has some intrinsic value that makes it special from other forms of money.
Yes.
And I disagree with that. My counter to that is the only reason that gold has value is because it's shiny and we like it.
Yeah.
There's no other animal in the animal kingdom that goes around and is like, wow, gold. I'm going to sit on I guess there are dragons, but they're not really. That's mythical.
I think there are, there's some birds and monkeys that like shiny things.
That like shiny things,
but they don't trade in it. So
they don't. Yeah. So for me, I would argue that all money is fiat money. It's money because we give it that value, because the money then is a service.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
First of all, I love the Peter Pan analogy there, because if Tinkerbell dies, the show is over. Much like if we no longer believe in a currency, the show is over.
Show's over. Yeah.
Let me play, I don't even know if I'd say devil's advocate, but let me propose a counter, right? Which is the history by now of gold and silver as functioning as money and currency. It's so long. It's not intrinsic, but it's extremely stable. Like even to this day, like people trade some in silver and gold. It maybe not serving the same function like precisely, but like I could imagine, some post-nuclear war future where we're right back to gold and silver.
Sure.
Assuming the mints didn't get nuked or something.
Well,
I don't know
so
exactly how that would play out.
Yeah.
But the subjective and marginal value of that is very, very high because it's very, very entrenched. What do you make of that as a counterpoint? Or
I would say, in response to that, the reason gold and silver were so useful as money is because they didn't go bad. You could melt them down, and you could create more of them. You could imprint it for credibility. You can't do that with things like eggs or chickens, and it's very difficult for an egg to be a store of value because it goes bad, right? Yeah. There were certain properties of gold in metal that did make it valuable. There's just like there are certain properties in paper that make it valuable as a money. So in terms of post-apocalyptic world, I mean, if we don't have a printing press, I'd say definitely we'll go right back to gold and silver, assuming it's not irradiated, right? That might be.
There are other properties there. But isn't that part of what makes money so interesting is this nature of I think it should open your eyes a little bit once you start thinking of money as a service and then evaluating the different properties. Because this is what I do whenever I teach the money section, is I talk about what are different things that we see used as money, right? And everybody goes immediately to dollar bills and coins, right? And usually I'll have some clever students bring up gold and silver, and now they might even mention what is Bitcoin money, right? And then we have a discussion about that. But then you can talk about things like the stones of the Island of Yap, and you can talk about like money that you can't, right? There's a story about I guess I should tell the Island of Yap story unless you want to do it, but
I'll go for it. Yeah.
The idea here is there's this island and they have these particular types of stones, and they all agree that these are the money and these are the currency, right? And so if I want to come buy one of the chickens out of your flock, then I bring you the stone, and then now you have the stone, and we all agree that it's yours. And then there's a big stone up on the hill, And so that's my stone, and I want to buy this hut that you made. And so we trade. Now that's Ryan's stone, and the community's small, and everybody knows that's Ryan's. And it used to be Lee's, and now it's Ryan. So, but now the hut is Lee's, right? And there's a, you know, what's the word for that? There's a story, probably a bit of a folklore, right? They're transporting one of the stones across the island's kind of a crescent shaped thing. The boat sinks. The now your stone that you just got for the house is at the bottom of the ocean. It turns out that doesn't deter us at all. The collective consciousness knows that that's Ryan's stone at the bottom of the ocean.
Still there, yeah.
Yeah. So when now you want to buy an the entire flock of chickens from someone else, you just say, hey, that's Steve's stone down there now, and all goes on. That's very much like the ones and zeros of the Bitcoin, or even just the banking system. But so comment a little bit for us on this discomfort that some people get of like Bitcoin. It's like all in the internet. If the power goes out, I don't have access to my money, which is also true of my credit card. So there's more similarities there than I think we recognize.
Well, so adopting a new way of viewing things is always hard. It's always difficult. I mean, we are used to, we have a lock-in effect, right? We're used to what we grow up with. And I can understand where it would be difficult to, I have trouble with it sometimes as well, sitting down and saying, okay, well, if the power all goes out, then I don't have it anymore. Well, if the plumbing goes out, you don't have a toilet anymore either. If the heating goes out, you don't have warmth in your home. If there are many other things that, if that catastrophe happens, you've got bigger problems than whether or not you can do a medium of exchange at the grocery store.
That's a pretty big issue, though.
It's a pretty big issue, but the system that we have, with the electricity that we have available to us, with the data that we have available to us, the ledger, and how cheaply we can record these, for lack of a better term, instantaneous contracts for purchase. I love the Island of Yap story because it's all about property rights and contracts.
Yes.
The stone only serves as a link between what I can see and then what I can feel here. With Bitcoin, those people who grew up with computers probably have a better connection to it than I would, because I still remember the days of America Online, when that first really came out and kept getting all these little floppy disks in the mail. I still remember those days before computers were necessary for school.
I remember going to the library to get access to the internet, right? So
I teach with PowerPoint, and I know that I know a few of my colleagues, they love the chalk and talk method much more, and I love that too. But I love that I can fix PowerPoint mid-lecture. If there's a typo on my slides, I can do that. I think in the time when Milton Friedman was lecturing, he would have to send out for transparencies. That was extremely expensive. So if there was a mistake in there, he couldn't fix it. I have a very low transaction cost to fixing my slides. Of course, if the electricity goes out, then it's done, right? Then I've got to hope that there's at least enough light for the whiteboard, and maybe there's a dry erase marker that actually works. We've lowered these transaction costs. We've lowered the transaction cost of money from melting down gold and forging it into a coin with such and such emperor's face on it to a few clicks of a button. And that is so great, because I know everyone jokes about cigarettes in prison. But do you know where that joke comes from?
Well, that is an example that I discussed, right? So if you have prisons or
Radford papers.
Sorry, go ahead.
Part of that Radford paper, and that's in there that very few people talk about. Of course, everyone talks about cigarettes in prison, right? It's durable, you can exchange it. But what Radford also
easily divisible is the interesting
what was that?
part. Easily divisible is the
easily divisible.
Part. One of the things about a silver or gold is this idea of clipping. So I was asked to speak to a high school group to kind of cap off their econ class, and I said, no problem, let me see your syllabus, right? And there's like an entire month of the class on clipping coins. And I went, what am I looking at? When is the syllabus from, right? And it's just one of those things where I don't know where I got the syllabus. There were lots of good things about the syllabus too. I don't make it sound like it was a complete farce of a class, but it's just like that's an issue from a different time. I wouldn't teach that in Econ 101 today. But that's a divisibility problem, right?
But I'd say that's also important because, okay, the use of the cigarettes improved overall welfare in the prison. The use of money made everyone better off. Mm-hmm. So the use of gold, the evolution from barter to gold made everybody better off. The evolution to bimetal, silver, gold made everyone better off. The evolution to paper currency, to bonds, treasury bills. If you really want to get broad with it, you can talk about maybe even equities and credit cards as being a form of money, although a lot of people debate that. This new transaction method, this blockchain, this crypto, just outside of Bitcoin even, is a vast welfare improvement for society. Now, I don't think it's going to be, it's a revolution. We're all going to change the way we see money. No, this is all very much based in old monetary theory. Money is behaving the same way it behaved in the 1400s, 1500s when we changed over to gold pieces to paper, et cetera, et cetera. But it will marginally improve our welfare in that it decreases the transaction costs to making exchanges. And I think that, on one hand, I don't want to say that, Bitcoin is, I don't want to be part of the Bitcoin cultists who say that this is just going to change the way we think of money. No, it really doesn't. But what it does do is it makes those transactions cheaper and easier so that overall welfare can improve. It's one of those, we always like to talk about bad news, right? In the media. I think you and I have talked about we give the what was it, the Rosling exam?
Yes.
The Gapminder exam.
Yes.
Where you give an exam and you ask people, okay, are people more poor? Are we more unequal? Are health outcomes worse? And it seems like, 2 out of 3 students are going to tell you, yes, we're worse off. People are living shorter lives. But in reality, we're living longer lives. We're living healthier lives. Yep. You can argue that in, distinct countries, maybe inequality is growing or not, but all the measures, at least from the World Bank and the UN, show global inequality itself has actually been going down along with poverty. And you feel free to check me on that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that was how it was, at least back in, just after the Great Recession, even.
The lesson from Rosling, right, is this optimism idea. Another mainstream person that people would be familiar with would be like Steven Pinker makes these type of arguments, right? Of just like, we get caught up with the minute to minute. What you said this, right? It's the growth rate, not the level, right? And so things aren't growing fast enough for us, even though they're positive, not good enough. And then we forget to step back once in a while and see what level we're at. So that's an excellent point. So I want to go back one step because you brought up durability, which again, like reminded me of the distinct nature. So you can't go out in the backyard tomorrow and find a piece of Bitcoin that somebody dropped, which probably is a feature, not a bug. If you're not going to find any paper currency that's 100 years old laying around, because that's going to have been preserved. In fact, one of the things the Federal Reserve does is destroy old bills that have been ripped or torn or whatever. But man, you'd be over the moon if you stepped out your back porch tomorrow and your daughter was digging in the garden and said, Dad, what's this? And it turned out to be a gold doubloon or something, right?
Yeah.
So any comments about the durability nature? Because in a weird way, Bitcoin is both more and less durable than paper money.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I can't say that I'll find a Bitcoin lying around. I guess what you could say, because there's that story of the guy who I guess threw away his laptop 7 years ago that had his Bitcoin wallet password.
Yes.
And he is desperately seeking his laptop in the town dump because I want to say it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars now. Obviously he would have to have electricity and a computer to do that. And a gold doubloon can last and last and last. The issue with the gold doubloon, I would again say, is this transaction cost. Yes, my daughter dug it up and how wonderful that is. Now I got to find a trader. Now I got to find someone who trades with it. I got to find a way to value it. Sure. And these transaction costs are still extremely high.
course,
The
relative to the
durability
value of
is
a
still
gold balloon, probably
maintained.
worth it.
Yeah, yeah. The durability is still there. But the durability in terms of store value, if I was say, let's say it was pirates, because I like pirates anyway. Let's say, the pirate who buried that, he's long dead, so that durability doesn't do much for him. And with Bitcoin, the durability of Bitcoin does a lot for us up until we run out of electricity or things like that. And that's why money, we were talking about Taylor rule works until it doesn't. Money as a medium of exchange, store of value, and account, it's going to work until it doesn't. And it may be at some point that we get enough Bitcoin out there and it's so accepted that suddenly as a speculative tool, it's not worth as much. And now it becomes a better medium of exchange. That's what I keep hearing anyway. A lot of people saying, give it more time. It'll be a more stable medium of exchange once it gets closer to 21 million.
It was sort of odd. I actually talked to a couple people after church, and more than one person told almost the same story that you're describing, where somebody had bought some Bitcoin and it was years ago and they forgot their password. And, one version of the story went, and this is like people telling stories about people they knew. So this isn't a news story. This is word of mouth story being passed around. One story was somebody helped them look up their password or something and figured it out. And then the other story was, some ridiculous sum of money that would now be worth $100,000 or whatever it was. And they haven't been able to figure it out. And so that money's just gone. And the person relaying the story to me was like, and the person who lost that money is like surprisingly okay with it. Like, it doesn't seem like a real 100,000 to them.
Well, if let's say, I back in 2011, when I first been looking at this, well, I want to say Bitcoin was worth what, maybe $200, $300 for one Bitcoin. If I went out and bought $100 worth of Bitcoin back then, okay, I've put this value, oh darn, I'm out $100.
Right.
And let's say I wait 10 years, I live under a rock for 10 years.
Right.
And I come back, oh wow, that $100 that I spent way back then is now worth tens of thousands. Yeah. I've forgotten the password and I can't get to it anymore. Well, honestly, yeah, I'm going to be okay with that, because really what I lost was that $100 back then.
Yeah.
Yes, I have the opportunity cost of, my goodness, these tens of thousands here, but a lot of times I don't think we feel those opportunity costs as strongly, especially on the margin. And this goes back to that old economic principle. People make decisions on the margin.
Yes.
I made a decision on the margin to invest that $100 in Bitcoin back in 2011. I'm not feeling on the margin that loss of tens of thousands of dollars. I could understand that. Yeah.
So I want to get to two more questions. The first is we've talked about the electricity thing. We've talked about mining. We've talked about the computing power. I'm not real familiar with this, but I've seen this idea floating around of like the literal like carbon footprint of the mining and the problem, because you've talked about transaction costs being very low and this whole process being more efficient, and almost from a consumer side, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Do you have any sense of like this other idea of, okay, as we're mining 21 million Bitcoin and there's all these other currencies that come out, is the computing problem, is that a real deal?
The computing problem is a real deal. Absolutely. And this is where, again, those transaction costs are low up to a point. And these transaction costs, of course, will change. I want to say there's a particular measure on from Coinbase, and I usually download the data off of Quandl. I'm going to go ahead and check that. But there's a transaction cost in terms of miners' revenue versus the cost that they face, and you can measure this. And this goes up and down violently. Right now, for example, Bitcoin has never been this expensive to mine. So they've had this very large increase in transaction costs, and that may gum up the works, and the exchange may not be as fluid or as easy. You might find, like your computer buffering, right? If you're ever watching Netflix and you see the little buffer thing, like, crud. We may get into that. Bitcoin right now, I think, recently reached $1 trillion in market capitalization.
Really?
So if you want to think about Bitcoin in terms of a GDP, of an economy, that market capitalization is kind of close to it. And so we have a huge amount of power going into trying to account for those $1 trillion in transactions. The US economy alone is 20 to $21 trillion a year.
Uh-huh.
So you would have to massively scale up the electricity use to get to Bitcoin replacing the dollar.
Right.
And then think about, okay, Bitcoin replacing the yuan or the euro. I don't see it as a replacement. I don't think it will get there. And I think before it gets there, the Fed is already very interested in blockchain technology.
Yeah, where's the Fed coin? That's coming, right?
Yeah, that's coming down the pipe. That's definitely coming down the pipe.
But that's not speculation on your part. Haven't I seen actual discussion of that
on
an actual blockchain coin that the Federal Reserve is going to run?
Yeah.
I think it's literally in the works.
Yeah.
I mean,
everyone's looking into it. The ECB, the European Central Bank, is looking into it because, like we were using that transaction between you and I about buying the chessboard. If the Fed can decentralize the verifications,
the Fed decentralized, that's an oxymoron, isn't it, right?
Well, decentralized centralization, centralized decentralization.
It's weird, right? I mean, it's weird.
But if the Fed can use it, they'll use it.
Yeah.
And that would potentially, if we solve this power problem, that would cut a lot of costs for them.
Yeah.
Or it might, even they can just vary things and incorporate blockchain in a way that does not use so much power. There's a lot of invention that can come from this ledger, from this memory, from this durable service that crypto provides. And I think that, we're going to hit a wall with the electricity needs of it. But like with any other resource, we're going to find some way around it. I mean, this is like I think you and I have talked before about the Ehrlich bet back in the 70s, right? Where you had this question of environment.
Yeah, recap that for us.
What's that?
Recap that for us.
So this was, the population bomb question, right? That the population, I want to say it was Dr. Ehrlich, right? Do I have that name right?
I can't remember.
The idea is that the population will continue to grow exponentially and will run out of resources.
Yes.
And well, first of all, the population yes, we've reached 7 billion, but it's actually slowing down too. And our resources are still growing. The population bomb didn't happen when he thought it would.
Right.
So we have these kinds of things where we reach a point, an inflection point, and it becomes really profitable for someone to figure out how to change this.
And that's
or it becomes really costly to not change it.
That's a huge point. So the problem with an idea like the population bomb, right, is that idea is predicated on population growth is exponential and resource production is linear. And so at some point it has to outpace and so on and so forth. Yeah. But that ignores, and I think this was a huge problem with a lot of the reaction to things in the pandemic, is we're like, oh, if the growth rate of the virus is like this, but people will react to that and change their behavior, right? And so I'm setting aside the different type of policies that we would want to encourage or discourage types of activity. Just set all that aside for a moment. Pretend the government fell down the stairs and didn't do anything. People would still react to what it is that's happening around them. And it might be too late, it might be too early, it might be too little, it might be too much. But the point is that they'll react. And it'll almost certainly be in the right direction in many cases, right? But so a population bomb problem ignores that behavior, right? That there will be at some point a lower incentive to have kids, for example, that will actually change the population rate through normal human behavior. And then the other idea, and I think this is important for a lot of things, right? This is Matt Ridley's work, the Rational Optimist, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is when you have a situation that calls out for a solution, you have a situation that calls for people to find those solutions. And the bigger the problem is, right? This is why, like, I would be sort of like lukewarm on climate change, for example. I wouldn't say that it doesn't exist. I'm just not very worried about it. And the reason I'm not very worried about it is because I think those solutions are on a path to get us to people wanting to solve that kind of thing, long before it ends up with the kind of world-ending type of problem. Maybe that's a topic for a different episode, but I think it's important to, and I don't want to trivialize climate change, because I think that's an enormous issue with a lot of nuance, and I would absolutely love to discuss that at some point.
I think we're both being very optimistic here, and given the history, we have some reason to be optimistic, because at these potential inflection points, there has been a change. Yeah. There has been a technology development. There has been a change in how things are done, institutional change, and of all kinds. And so I think the point that we're both getting at is, yes, we have this problem within cryptocurrency, that it takes a massive amount of power, and it will take a huge amount more of this power to bring it to a larger scale. Right. But I think that, and I don't know what it is, whether that's, people talk about quantum computing, maybe someone just finds a cheat within the programming that allows it to use less less power. I mean, the thing about wheat, what was the invention somewhere in the early 90s or late 80s that allowed for us to get 4 times the grain harvest out of wheat. Right. These things do happen. We do find these incremental technology,
golden rice boosts. Ideas, stuff like
that. Yeah.
So
that can come up. So I think that, yes, it's a problem. I do also think, though, that a lot of people are working very hard to solve this problem, and I think it'll happen.
Trust in human ingenuity. Absolutely. So this is a perfect transition into the last thing that I want to talk about. We're over an hour now. There is this part of the Bitcoin milieu, right? That is, it's decentralized, and here's all these problems with the Fed, right? Like, some of my listeners are going, that Ryan Mattson, he's a shill for the Fed, right? And he's even trying to advocate for Bitcoin being centralized.
I like the Fed, yeah.
Yeah, you like the Fed. Talk to me about this idea of the decentralization of Bitcoin. Some people are even out there saying Bitcoin has succeeded. I don't think there's much case for that in terms of replacing a, but I am an economist. I like market solutions. And I think even at a political level, decentralization is often a really good idea. And so there's an appeal to me about a free banking type of atmosphere that gets us to a solution. So one of the things that I like to teach, and I think is very important to understand, is that monopolies sow the seeds of their own demise. Because there's a high level of profitability, people want to find ways around that, right? You mentioned the phone earlier. That's textbook 101 example. I can come up with a list of 12 other things. I think we're seeing that in real time with internet provision, right? And like the natural monopoly of wires in the ground. So why not Bitcoin doing the same thing and replacing currency? And let's have decentralized currency. Let's have Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, Ryan dollars, and Stitzel bucks. Let's do it. Why not? Or
well, so why not? Why it may not happen? One thing, we have the electricity barrier, right? Or so we've covered that. So I'll move on from there. Then second of all, are we going to be okay with being able to hold all these currencies in our head and this value, which I would say in the 1890s was a very big problem. Today, not a big problem, because my phone can do that. I can say, I'm going to pay this amount of Bitcoin, but let's say the vendor only takes Ethereum. Well, shoot, we have automatic exchanges going on. Yeah. I don't even have to think about it. I can think in Bitcoin, he can think in Ethereum, and then we move on with life. We've lowered that transaction cost. So that's one. So 2 potential roadblocks here: the electricity use, whether people can adopt it at these low transaction costs. And the third one is going to be the strategic reaction of the Fed. the Fed has a big incentive to incorporate this technology. And if Bitcoin has a flawed money growth rule, as I've argued that it does, and the Fed has a better money growth rule, then the Fed's, you would go towards that, hey, dollar stable medium of exchange. I know what the dollar is worth. All we've done is we've changed the plumbing of it. All we've done is we've taken out the wires to the telephone. So the natural monopoly that we have in the Federal Reserve could maintain its dominance simply based on other aspects of money. But the technology that is changing these things, they're lowering these transaction costs to where multiple kinds of money out there is not that huge a deal anymore. But I also think there is a strong credibility argument. And the Federal Reserve is very concerned about its credibility because, again, Tinkerbell, you got to keep Tinkerbell clapping, or you got to keep clapping or Tinkerbell is going to die. Yeah. The Fed is very, very concerned in its credibility. I think we, in a previous podcast about modern monetary theory, talked about credibility of the U.S. government and its debt. Yeah. Money has to be, or a future episode. Money has to be credible. It has to be believed in. And the Federal Reserve has a big head start with that. The US dollar has a big head start. Bitcoin has been around for 10 years and has a reputation for volatility, which makes it a great speculative asset. But I see no scenario in which it can replace the dollar totally. It can augment the dollar. It can be a nice competitor with the dollar for people to go back and forth with. But we're talking about, if we're talking about a very large competitor versus a very small competitor who maybe cannot scale up as much as they would like to. So why not move over to Bitcoin? Because we'll hit a wall with electricity. We'll hit a wall or power needed to verify. We could hit a wall with whether or not people can exchange it in multiple different circumstances. Yeah. And we'll also hit a wall with the strategic decisions of the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank and the People's Bank of China and all these other central banks that have a very large vested interest in defending the credibility and use of their currency.
Yeah, so I'll take a couple of points here and get your reactions. First thought is, if you have a situation where you have a monopoly and true stable competition arises, that's a good thing. So even if they don't rise to the point of being, but it becomes widely accepted and it's just performing, like, definitely almost certain to be a good thing. We've talked about the Fed as a monopoly, the US dollar being this natural monopoly. If you switch out the plumbing, the nature of the natural monopoly, the centralized transaction history that you were talking about, you're laying the groundwork for moving away from that. And if the Fed becomes just one coin among all the other coins, they could lose. So which I'm not, I guess I'm not crying about, but maybe some people who are advocates for the Fed would. And then, of course, you elegantly laid out the case for why there may not be a wall with electricity, or there may be. But if you're talking about, I'm almost uninterested in the physics of the problem, because even if that proves to be insurmountable, there will almost certainly be a lateral solution to that kind of thing. Thoughts about any of those comments?
Sure. The lateral solution I agree with. And I think that, the three problems I laid out can definitely be there. I think maybe the problem that I overlooked that I think I've mentioned to before is the absolutely fatal money growth rule of Bitcoin. Yeah. There is almost zero flexibility in specifically Bitcoin when it's compared to the dollar. And I think that economic misunderstanding at its creation has led it's a time bomb. At some point, it's going to go off. Yep. Ethereum and some of the competitors that I've seen, and I guess this is where I become the evil proponent for things other than Bitcoin there. I think that they have a competitive edge in, I think, aspects such as decentralized finance, contract verification, other things that make its use more, not more varied, more diversified, more diversified, and could make them more stable in the long run. You know, we with there are two kinds of problems, yes, that you're talking about here. We have the physics of it, which we've discussed, I think, at this point in depth. With Bitcoin specifically, I think also the problem of its money rule, which again, I think is a fatal misunderstanding of Friedman's work. I think that will lead to the eventual death of it. Now, when that's going to happen, I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't know. But probably sometime after it hits 21 million, and we start to see some of the lack of flexibility with it.
So if you have competition, though, the money growth rule is a thing on which the different currencies can compete. So you can solve the money growth rule problem in a way that a centralized monopoly currency cannot, because the monopoly currency has to get that right. If it doesn't, we pay the consequences, period, full stop. That's why they want discretion, and they don't want a Taylor rule at the Fed, even though they act like they're behaving by the Taylor rule 90% of the time.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Yeah.
Yeah, they do until they don't. Yeah. But suppose Bitcoin got it wrong, but Ethereum gets it right, problem solved. So, I'm not attached to Bitcoin as a thing, but the idea of competition infiltrating money, it's a pretty powerful idea. So I'll leave you this. You can play us out with this. Do you think, suppose the physics problem gets solved, and who knows if we end up with Bitcoin itself or a series of competitors, do you see any reason to think that even with the decentralized verification process, there are still some kind of economies of scale or other reason to think that we end up with a monopoly? Ethereum just takes over everything, and the Fed is doing its best to deal with Ethereum head on. And one of the things that could solve that, and I don't know, I'd have to think about it, I don't know which way this would go. If you're having a problem of the unit of account, that can be addressed actually by somebody else providing another service, which is here's an app that you just use. It's a wallet for coins of some type, and it just does all the calculation for you, gives you that information. I mean, you'd have that on your Apple Watch and be done with it. So comment on those things to play us out.
So I think, I think everyone's going over to blockchain. I think at the end of the day, or at the end of the century, that's just going to be the way things are. And whether or not the dollar maintains a natural monopoly on monetary service is going to depend more on their money growth rule and the economics of it rather than the computer science aspect of it. Better money tends to attract money users, and people will abandon monies that are too inflationary. And I think at some point people will abandon monies that are too deflationary. We have yet to see that happen. Of course, Bitcoin's extremely deflationary right now, and people are flocking to it still. That will all depend on how we use money and how much flexibility money is given. Bitcoin is too strict to survive. The dollar is flexible enough to survive. Now, it'll probably lose market share, I think, to things, to Ethereum, to Ripple, to Dogecoin, to things like that. I think if we tie money too much to this kind of gold standard idea, if we don't allow for a certain amount of flexibility, whether through rules or discretion, you could have a flexible rule, you could have rigid discretion. I think those monies are going to be the ones that do not compete in the future. So whether the dollar can maintain its flexibility and usefulness in the face of other competitors will determine whether it can continue.
So you kind of touched on a topic that maybe we should have been, a framework we should have been talking about all along. There is a lot in monetary policy talking about, does good money drive out bad, or does bad money drive out
Yes.
good. That's certainly at play here, and I didn't think about that until you just said that. So maybe that's something I should have been bringing up all along.
Another podcast, right?
Yeah. So can you tell us the good money drives out bad story versus bad drives out good, really quickly, just to set that up, since you've actually touched on that.
Yeah, since I've touched on it, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to refer to my class notes because I've been teaching on this, and there are different ways I've been teaching it, so I want to be sure I get it right.
We were talking about
the idea is Gresham's law is that bad money drives out good money.
Mhm.
That's the idea with Gresham's law, is that you have two coins that are used in a simple economy. One is pure silver and the other is half silver, half tin. And then the idea is people are going to hoard the one that they can tell, right? This one's pure silver. This one's okay. They're going to hoard that silver one and try and spend the other one, right? So then that medium of exchange is then going to be corrupted by this bad money that goes out, and people will lose faith in it. Tinkerbell's going to die, et cetera, et cetera. There is a counterpoint to this, which I've seen referred to as Tyr's law of good money driving out bad money. And this is where I want to be careful, because as I've seen it, what I would actually describe it as, stable money drives out less stable money, or volatile money. So this is, kind of that question of, okay, if we have Bitcoin, are people going to hoard Bitcoin and then maybe spend in dollars? And then we'd have, the dollars kind of driving out Bitcoin because Bitcoin's too valuable. Or are we going to have people converting to dollars as the medium of exchange because it's much more stable? And then, keeping this, like I said, this is very difficult to deal with and kind of conceptualize, at least for me anyway. If we look at Argentina or Venezuela, there should be very high demand for something like cryptocurrency because their currency is so unstable. Whereas Bitcoin, even in all its deflationary volatility, is much more stable than these other currencies. And that's evidenced by people who are moving over to hold their store value in it, to hoard that. So we could have the Venezuelan story, where the Bolivar is just now flooding out because people want to get rid of it and then hold on to Bitcoin. Or we could be in the situation where, okay, we can talk about it from this sense then as well, because Bitcoin is providing that store of value better. It begins to drive out the inflationary money, because then people are going to be using that for the monetary service of store of value. There's a lot, and maybe we should do another one on this
we
one.
Can talk about it another
where
time.
We've got more time. I would argue that money has to, a good money has to satisfy those four things that I mentioned of the medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, speculative tool. And those monies, that's what people are looking for. If a money fails these four things, then it will eventually be driven out and people will stop using it. Economies dollarize because their local currency doesn't work. Zimbabwe, in the end, after the hyperinflation, dollarized. Many people in Venezuela use dollars as a savings and store of value there as well. There are certain countries, Ecuador was one example, that just said, okay, forget it, we're using the dollar as our currency. People want stability. People want to know that this $15 is going to be able to purchase that 15 value worth of pizza, and it won't go too far up or too far down at any given point in time.
My guest today has been Ryan Mattson. Ryan, thanks for joining us on the EconBuff.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the EconBuff. You can find all previous episodes on YouTube at EconBuff Podcast. You can check out our website at econbuffpodcast.wixsite.com. That's WIXSIT.com. You can contact us at econbuffpodcast@yahoo.com.